What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. And Chris, we have finally come to the end of Summer League pool play, and the Cavs have their final game on Saturday, which will wrap up the entire Summer League process. Last night might have been the most intriguing Summer League game the Cavs have played, right? They played against Bronny James. They got their first little look at LeBron James' son. It was very interesting because Bronny hasn't been playing well at all throughout Summer League, and yet he put up some numbers against the Cavs and took it down to the wire. It was a game that really caught my eye and was something that you might want to look forward to when it comes to players to watch for the coming years. Obviously, the Lakers came away with the dub, 93-89. Bronny James came away with 13 points on 5 of 10 shooting, 1 of 3 from three-point range, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 blocks. And then you look into the Cavs corner, and they had Jaylen Tyson, the rookie, the 20th overall pick, coming away with 21 points on 6 of 9 shooting, 1 of 3 from three-point range, 11 rebounds, 9 assists, and 2 steals. He was a stat sheet stuffer, Chris. So I know we kind of went back and forth the last couple of games with Jaylen Tyson, but we don't want to take things out of context. We don't want to say things too large when it comes to Summer League games, but this was the bounce-back game that he needed. What were your thoughts about this game as a whole and then seeing what Jaylen Tyson was able to do on the floor?
Yeah, I thought he was the story of last night's game. I just don't think you make too much out of an end result when it comes to Summer League. The Cavs blew a double-digit lead. They gave up a 9-0 run late in the game. But I don't think that takes away. Look, players are always going to say, I would rather have the win. I'm a competitor. My near triple-double doesn't mean as much because we lost the game and they went on a 9-0 run late in the game and all that kind of stuff. But for us, I think we can look at it and we can see some positive things about Jaylen Tyson that make him an intriguing fit for this team. He brings positional versatility. He brings a skill set that the Cavs could certainly use. We've talked throughout the last couple of years about trying to alleviate some of the pressure off of Donovan Mitchell when we're talking big picture, right? Alleviate some of the pressure off of Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. Don't make them have to initiate all of the offense for the teams. Diversify with the number of creators that they're going to have on the offensive end of the floor. And for Jaylen Tyson to step into basically a de facto point guard role because the Cavs did not have Craig Porter Jr. there. For a majority of Summer League, it was Craig Porter Jr. as the point guard, Jaylen Tyson playing off the ball, something that he's still trying to get adjusted to, those guys sharing the backcourt together. But last night, Jaylen Tyson was thrust back into a de facto point guard role, very similar to the way that he played at Cal as a junior. And you could just tell that he was so much more comfortable with the ball in his hands. He was so much more comfortable as a primary initiator, a primary playmaker, a primary creator, both for himself and for others. He was operating out of pick and roll at various points. He was pushing the ball quickly ahead in transition at various points. He was catching the ball when he was playing off the ball at times and attacking off the dribble, attacking those closeouts and things like that. So I think you saw a potential vision of down the road how he can impact this team as a secondary playmaker, a tertiary playmaker. He has talked all along, Ethan, about, hey, look, I've got to learn how to blend into the fabric of this team. I'm not going to have the same usage. I'm not going to get the same touches. I'm not going to have the same opportunities that I had my final season in college. So I have to learn how to fit in with this particular team and adjust to a new role with this particular team. But for one night in Summer League, he was back in the role where he was most comfortable in college. And if he has to be thrust into that role for the Cavs, he has shown at least some flashes that he can do that. He has that playmaking ability. He does have that shot creation ability. And he did a lot of different things well in last night's Summer League game. And it was exciting from a Cavs perspective to see the various ways that he could potentially impact a basketball game.
I mean, I know it's Summer League, Chris, but a near triple-double, nothing to sneeze at, right? And being able to do it while thrusted into a different role that you kind of didn't have for a majority of Summer League with Craig Porter Jr. being out that game, it felt like he was really showing, and we've talked about this, how much he can impact multiple facets of the game. Rebounding, assisting, passing, defense, like scoring the basketball, obviously, which is what he's known for. But I
look at him, Ethan. I look at him because so many people are trying to project him forward and say, okay, where does he fit in the rotation? Right? Where does he fit in the grand scheme of this thing with a team that already has two ball-dominant guards in Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland? And number one, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen in the future when it comes to Darius. Is he going to be here? Is he not going to be here? You know what I mean? So that's a variable that is one that could certainly change depending on how things start this year for the Cavs, depending on what kinds of offers the Cavs continue to get for Darius, depending on what kinds of opportunities are out there and what kinds of players are out there in a potential trade marketplace. So as of right now, I think it makes sense to talk about this team from the standpoint of they have the core four. They have Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell together. So I totally understand why people are saying, well, wait, where does Jaylen Tyson fit here in this grand scheme? Because, you know, if he's most comfortable with the ball in his hands and those two guys are too, how is he going to get those opportunities, But I think if we're projecting it forward, Jaylen Tyson is the eventual replacement for Caris LeVert. That's how I view him anyway. And I believe that's how the Cavs are viewing him as well. Caris is in the final year of his contract. Who knows what's going to happen at the trade deadline? Who knows what's going to happen beyond this year? But stylistically, you have a guy who's very Caris LeVert-y. Maybe not the most polished outside shooter, maybe not the best three-point shooter, although Jaylen Tyson does not like that there are questions about his outside shot. And he continues to say, I could shoot the bleep out of the ball. Just give me an opportunity. That's all I did early in my high school career. But his numbers in college don't point to, you know, a sharpshooter in the mold of Max Strus or Sam Merrill or something like that, right? So I think that's still something that he's developing within his own game. He is more, you know, take it off the bounce, attack the rim if you can, play out of the pick and roll, similar to Caris LeVert, maybe get to the mid-range, something along those lines. Also similar to Caris LeVert early on in his career. Maybe he's going to have to shift into more of a defensive stopper, more of a rebounder, more of a tough guy who brings some physicality because of what's demanded on the roster that he's part of. So I think that if you're looking down the road, like that's the projectable role for Jaylen Tyson, is that kind of role that Caris LeVert has adopted for this particular team. And if the shot comes, if the off-ball comfortability comes, then all of a sudden I think the Cavs are looking at a really, really good player. For now, I think they drafted a rotational player, a probably back end of the rotation player with the 20th pick in the first round of what was considered a very weak and bad draft. And that's not a bad thing in any sort of way. He can play 1, 2, 3. He can guard 1, 2, 3. I think it probably remains to be seen if he can guard point guards at the NBA level. But theoretically, the idea of him is very Caris LeVert-y on this particular team.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting also because you mentioned Darius Garland and what he brings also, obviously to this team, but then the concepts of him being traded as well. And
Right.
there was a trade recently that involved another guard in the NBA, Russell Westbrook. He was traded originally to the Utah Jazz and is now said to be figuring out a buyout with the Utah Jazz to then hand over to none other than the Denver Nuggets. So, for me, when it comes to the Utah Jazz wanting a buyout with Russell Westbrook, it was one of two things. One, the possibility that they're okay with their guard lineup, that they're happy with who they have over there, or they're looking to get somebody of a better caliber than Russell Westbrook at this point in his career, right? And I was wondering for you, Chris, how much do you think, because we know Utah is one of those teams that has assets, has a little bit more of a stock and capital and things of that nature. How would this impact the possibility for Darius Garland to be involved in a trade to one of those places, or even a three-team deal when it comes to the Utah Jazz?
Yeah, I think 3-team deals, Ethan, are very tough to predict. I think they're very tough to put together. Same thing with 4-team deals and stuff like that. But I think Utah is one of the teams out there that opposing executives are wondering about. Okay, what are they going to do with Lauri Markkanen? We talk all the time, all the time. Deadlines oftentimes prompt movement. And I think when it comes to Lowry, just given his salary structure and his salary situation, August 6th is one of those days to watch. But I think because the Jazz are in an interesting state, they're coming off a 31-win season. They've got a lot of young, talented players. They've got a whole bunch of draft capital. I think there are people that are wondering, okay, which direction are the Jazz going to go in? Are they going to try and use some of that draft capital to get somebody who is more of a win now player? Or are they going to say, let's extend this rebuild a little bit longer? Let's really, really lean into the young, talented, up and coming players that we have on this roster. And let's continue to enhance that by using Lauri Markkanen as a trade chip, not as somebody who's going to be a focal point of our rebuild or a centerpiece of our rebuild for us. We're going to try and cash in on his value that's basically at an all-time high, given the way that he played in Cleveland, given the way that he has played since getting to Utah, and given the way that there's very little available in terms of potential impact players in this current trade marketplace. Things can change in a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. But as of right now, the biggest names out there that could make a significant difference for any kind of team, I would say it's Markkanen and it's Brandon Ingram of the Pelicans. So because the Jazz have that kind of asset and there are more quote unquote buyers than sellers, do they want to cash in on that? Are they willing to move him? And then what teams are going to get involved in that? And if one team on its own can't satisfy the Utah Jazz, say, for example, the Golden State Warriors, if they aren't willing to give up the pieces that are going to prompt Utah to move off of Markkanen, does Golden State get creative and pull in another team? And what does that look like? And who is that team? So I think anytime you have uncertainty with a direction of a rival team, it becomes an interesting scenario. And the Jazz have cap space. Like I said, they have draft capital. They have young talent that they could trade on their own, or they have the piece that a lot of teams out there, including the Warriors, are going to want with Markkanen. So I think they're a team that a lot of other executives around the league are looking at and monitoring to see if that's a pathway for them to improve. And look, if it is Markkanen and he is going to be available, not everybody is going to have the pieces to satisfy Utah, to get Utah to actually say yes to a deal. And not only will Golden State be involved, but other teams will try and get involved too, just to see what that cost would be, and see if they have the kind of assets that would make it worth it. So I do think as long as Markkanen is still out there, and as long as Utah has him on the roster, I don't think the trade activity in this year's offseason, I don't think transaction season can be put to bed as long as Brandon Ingram is out there and quote unquote available for the Pelicans. And as long as the Pelicans don't have a starting caliber center on their roster, I don't think trade season is officially over. I still think there's a second wave of activity that typically comes following free agency before training camp starts, where you could see a little bit more movement with these teams. And I think the two to watch, obviously, are New Orleans and Utah. And I don't think the Cavs are directly correlated when it comes to Utah, because I don't think they have the pieces to get Markkanen number one. And I don't think it's a trade fit from what the Cavs would potentially give up and what Utah would want in return. They've got a lot invested in their young backcourt to begin with, so I don't think Darius Garland makes all that much sense. They still have Walker Kessler. They can play John Collins at one of the two front court spots. They just drafted Kyle Filipowski. And I'm not saying that because of that, Utah would say absolutely no. I just don't think they would see enough value in somebody like Jared Allen. So I don't think the Cavs and Utah are a direct fit for a potential trade. But again, 3-team, 4-team deals, they certainly happen. And if a team doesn't have enough to get Markkanen on their own, they're going to be calling around and looking for a third option or a fourth option or something like that. And maybe possibly, then yeah, the Cavs could get involved with somebody like Darius or Jarrett. I don't think the Cavs are going to move either one of those guys. I still believe that. I believed that going into the offseason. I just don't think there's a player out there or a package out there waiting for the Cavs that they would be willing to say yes to involving either one of those guys, given how much they value Darius and given how much they value Jared Allen.
And Chris, you mentioned Lauri Markkanen, like a big guy, a guy who, quite frankly, the Cavs don't really have on their roster. A backup who can fill in the spaces when Evan Mobley or Jared Allen aren't on the floor. And when we were asking subtexters for questions earlier this week, one of them said, the Cavs are comprised of 8 guards on a team with 12 guaranteed contracts. They require forwards and a backup center for positional balance. Is this their plan, or is management satisfied with such a disproportionate number of guards to where they will have a significant size disadvantage? Chris, I mean, they're not wrong. There's a lot of guards on this roster, and as we know, this fan base believes anybody that's 6'5" and below is not big enough to play damn near in the NBA. So, like, what do you think about the moves that the Cavs need to make? We've talked about Cameron Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, DeAndre Hunter, those kinds of situations. But what do you think about the state of the Cavs right now and the players and the lack of size on this roster?
Yeah, I mean, Ethan, size isn't everything. You're looking to blend the right skill sets. You're looking for positional versatility. You're looking for a whole bunch of things. So it's not like, well, Max Strus is 6'5", so he can't play the small forward spot. Yeah, there are some physical limitations that come with that. There are some size complications that come with that, especially against super-sized teams, but not everybody has a super-sized team. You have to do what's right based on the kind of system that you want to run, the kind of options available to you, the kinds of players that you have on your roster, and what's the best way to maximize their skill sets and stuff. Would it be great if the Cavs had the perfect blend of size at every single position? Yes, of course. But that's not reality in the NBA. Unfortunately, you know, the kinds of players that are like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Paolo Banchero are very hard to come by. There's a reason why all of those guys were top 6 picks in the NBA draft, right? There's a reason why Mikal Bridges went for a haul of draft picks, because those guys are very difficult to find. There's a reason why OG Anunoby, the price tag for him to trade for him last year, was so incredibly high. Those guys are very, very difficult to get. So size across the roster is certainly a limitation for the Cavs. So they're going to have to find a way to work around that. They're going to have to find a way to do things a little bit differently than some of these other teams that do have that size across the roster. They're going to have to use their speed and their quickness and their herky-jerkiness, and they're going to have to do some creative things on the offensive end of the floor. At the same time, like, how many people have the level of rim protection and the level of defense in the back end that the Cavs have with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley? That's something that makes them unique. I would say 2 7-footers in the front court helps make up for some of that size that the Cavs don't have outside on the perimeter at the point of attack. So there are just different kinds of things that the Cavs will have to do when it comes to schematically, offensively, and defensively to mask some of those limitations that they'll have. But I don't look at this roster and say, like, it's a disaster. There's no way that the Cavs can compete in the Eastern Conference because they're not tall enough. I'm not going to sit here and say that there is no direction for this organization because they have an imbalanced roster. You know what I mean? If there's an opportunity that presents itself that will allow them to go out and improve the roster, maybe improve the size, maybe improve some positional versatility, the Cavs will explore that. But they're not desperate to do anything, and they don't have to be desperate to do anything. They don't have to make a move just to make a move. They don't have to go out and just target size and only size because the roster won't be good enough otherwise. They won 48 games last year. They've won 99 games over the last 2 years. That's the 5th most of any team across the NBA. Not just in the Eastern Conference, but across the NBA. It's a pretty good place to be in. They got to the Eastern Conference semifinals last year. And I know not every season is going to carry over to the next season. If we talk about this, 24-25 is going to be a new season, and everybody starts 0-0. And you can't just assume because of what happened last year, the same thing is going to happen, or success is going to follow, or however you want to phrase it. But this isn't the Atlanta Hawks here, right? This isn't the Chicago Bulls here. They aren't on a treadmill of mediocrity to nowhere. This is a team that power rankings have them as one of the 10 best teams in the entire NBA, despite the fact that they do have a glut of guards, despite the fact that they do have some skill set duplication, despite the fact that they don't have all that much size across their roster. So I just don't think, even though it is a weakness and even though there are limitations when it comes to this roster, I just don't think that they have to act out of desperation or overreact one way or another, or we have to start talking about them like they're some play-in team that has no direction whatsoever, has no identity whatsoever, because that's just not true. I totally understand that people want them to be on the same level as Boston, New York, Milwaukee, Philadelphia. And there are legitimate questions as to whether they belong on that particular tier. But like I said, we don't have to talk about them as if they're the friggin' Brooklyn Nets or the Toronto Raptors or the Chicago Bulls or the Atlanta Hawks, teams that are in a much, much worse place.
So, Chris, with that being said, do you believe that the Cavs are going to go get a backup center like Tristan Thompson or Damian Jones or someone of that caliber that's able to just fill in some spot minutes to be able to just fill in the gaps? Because obviously Evan Mobley and Jared Allen can't play 48 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Cavs came into this offseason, Ethan, with a general plan in place of ways that they wanted to enhance the roster, given the resources that they had to use to enhance the roster, and given some of the salary cap limitations that they had, and given some of the new rules with the CBA and the tax and the first apron and the second apron and stuff like that. And I think one of the things on that wish list was certainly a backup center. It becomes a little bit complicated because the question is, how much are you going to invest into that particular position when, if everything is going right, if everybody is healthy, that guy's meaning for the Cavs isn't all that significant. That guy's role for the Cavs isn't very big. And that guy's role for the Cavs is probably going to fluctuate for the entire regular season and maybe even when you get to the postseason. The third big on this team, or the backup center on this team, is essentially a specialist type player, right? Because Evan Mobley is technically the backup center, and the Cavs are clearly committed to getting him more time this coming year playing without Jarrett Allen. And that's going to happen at the backup center spot. That's not going to happen at a forward spot. So the need for the Cavs, it's certainly there because you want to have insurance. You want to have protection. You want to have somebody that may bring in a different kind of skill set, that may bring a different kind of dynamic behind the scenes and on the floor. But how much did Tristan Thompson really play for the Cavs last year? And how significant was his role really to their success? So because they're in the situation that they're in, and because they have both Jarrett and Evan, they don't feel like they need to go out and spend wildly on a backup center or pay the price for a more accomplished better option. Some of those guys are already gone. Some of those guys got paid. But the Cavs were never going to be, in that kind of situation where they spent that kind of money on that type of player. So I think they're looking at, okay, who can we get to play the Tristan Thompson type role? If Jarrett Allen misses a small stretch throughout the course of the season, if Evan Mobley misses a small stretch throughout the course of the season, if we don't want to put Dean Wade as a small ball center in certain lineup situations, can we go out and bring in a JaVale McGee type? Can we go out and bring back Tristan Thompson? The options available to the Cavs right now in free agency to do that are very, very limited. The top two guys are probably JaVale McGee and Tristan Thompson. Is there, some center that's out there that's better than those two guys that's available in a trade that won't be too costly, that won't cause the Cavs to give up too many quality assets in order to make that kind of deal? That's something that they'll probably explore. I don't think they would be willing to give up what it would cost to get Walker Kessler from Utah if he is indeed available. But is there like another tier below that of a guy? No Clint Capella, forget that. But another tier below that of a guy who can just give them a little bit more comfort, a little bit more insurance, a little bit more depth in the front court. That's something that they'll definitely look at. But just, overall, I don't sense a whole bunch of urgency from the Cavs because of the way that they can structure things with Evan Mobley playing center and staggering his minutes compared to Jarrett Allen.
Chris, as long as the Cavs don't have George Niang playing center ever again, I will be fine.
That didn't go all that well. Yeah.
That was atrocious. And if they never do that again, it will still be too soon. But I mean, Dean Wade as a small ball five, I could see it.
Depending on the matchup, obviously.
Correct.
That's not happening against Philadelphia. Yeah, but yeah, depending
on the matchup. Yeah, I mean, you need to go up against a team that's not playing with a whole lot of size. Maybe you do it against the Golden State Warriors. That's potentially have him with Draymond Green. That could work. But I mean, there is very limited situations where I would be like, yeah, Dean Wade, center, go
Right.
ahead,
Right.
keep him at the 4, keep him at the 3, like, and I like. I know his size and his strength allows him to do and be able to keep up on the defensive end, but offensively, like maybe you think about the spacing, maybe you think about those kinds of things and the
Mm-hmm.
small ball lineups and the offensive sets that you can run, but like I just don't feel comfortable with Dean Wade at the center position like that.
So
Like,
there's another variable to this, and again, we've talked about this a few different times. The Cavs most certainly have not decided exactly what they're going to do with their two-way contracts. I think they have a general idea in mind of who could be in the running for those. Amani Bates and Pete Nance are two of them. Pete Nance can play some center if you need to in a pinch, I guess, maybe, if you squint hard enough. This doesn't mean that he's ready for big minutes in the NBA. Pete has some developing that he needs to do. But it's clear that if you're the Cavs and you invested in him to some degree, and if you have a guy on a two-way, that's one of the values of having a player on a two-way contract, is that if you need to, similar to Craig Porter Jr. at the beginning of last year, if you need to, you can go to that guy and you can bring him up to the NBA roster and see if you get into a situation where you need him. So I'm not saying that that's the move for the Cavs, and I'm not saying that they're saying, well, because we have Pete Nance potentially on a two-way, we don't have to go out and we don't have to add a backup center in free agency. That's not what I'm saying. But the option exists, and that's what two-way contracts are for. And Pete Nance is somebody that this organization does like, not just because of his last name, but because of his skill set. He played well last year in the G League for this team, and he's been okay at various points throughout the course of Summer League. He was one of the leaders of the Summer League team. He's strong. He can play on the perimeter in terms of pick and pop type stuff. He can knock down a three. So the idea of having somebody like that this organization likes, that is in line potentially for a two-way contract, that is another situation for the Cavs to consider when it comes to in a pinch.
I mean, I like Pete Nance, right? I like Pete Nance. I like his ability to score as a big man. I like his ability to shoot from beyond the arc as a big man, because we know that's something that the Cavs need, and we know that he mentioned that in one of his interviews, trying to give himself some brownie points. But I mean, he's also gotten bullied in the paint by G League centers. Like, he's 6'10". Like, you said he's strong. He's strong enough against G League guys, but like we said, you're not throwing him against Joel Embiid.
Right.
You're not throwing him against Nikola Jokic. No. Like you're not throwing him against Giannis. Like, there are specific matchups that would have to be in place for him. And you mentioned Shaqtin' a Fool's finest, JaVale McGee. I mean, I think he gets a bad rap because of some of the silly plays that he's had, but I like his game. I like how he is able to manage the post. I like how he's able to spread the floor now a little bit more. But if it all comes down to what the Cavs are needing, and if they need a guy to be on the veteran minimum again,
right,
Tristan Thompson seems like the guy that they would go back to, because, one, he has a relationship with the guys in the locker room. Two, he has the most playoff experience still, and that's something that they'll need going forward. But just like, why would you not? Why would you not allow him to finish his career in Cleveland? Why would you not allow him to be a part of potentially the next run into the playoffs with a team that was basically ran by LeBron up until this point when they got to the playoffs? So I think that's an interesting concept, and I definitely think if the Cavs had to go one way, obviously they'll have guys on two ways for backup, but Tristan Thompson would definitely be my pick if I think the Cavs had to go a certain direction.
And that was always even if it wasn't Tristan, if it was somebody else, that was always the logical end result for the Cavs in free agency, was using a veteran minimum on that type of player, because Tristan only played 11 minutes a night last year for the Cavs. So if that's all you're going to need from your backup center, you don't want to start using a portion of your mid-level exception, right? You don't want to start paying between $6 and $8 million for that type of player. You want to use the veteran minimum. You want to find a guy who is not going to create any problems in terms of what his role is going to be, in terms of his touches on the offensive end, in terms of his playing time on a nightly basis. You know, Tristan's at a point in his career, even JaVale McGee is at a point in his career, and those are probably the top two names in free agency remaining at the center spot. Both guys are at a point in their career where they understand it's toward the end. They're not going to play every night. They're not going to get 20 minutes a night. They're not going to be heavily involved offensively, defensively. It's be a good vet on a team with playoff aspirations. If one of the bigs goes down, more of an opportunity is going to happen. If foul trouble pops up, more of an opportunity is going to happen. But the opportunity is not going to be a consistent one. And I think it would be important for the Cavs to more look that direction than somebody who is in the second year, third year, fourth year, trying to make a name for themselves, trying to show that they can do a few more things offensively and defensively, trying to get more consistent minutes, trying to get their next contract, something like that. It always felt like the end result, based on the way that this team is constructed, is that whoever it was that they were going to sign was going to be a veteran minimum type guy, because of the role that that particular player is going to step into. And then if the Cavs have to explore other free agency decisions when it comes to another shooting guard, another small forward, another power forward, then that's something that if they want to, if they're comfortable in the tax, if they're comfortable in the first apron, if there's the right player out there, all of these things are ifs, then they can tap into the mid-level exception for that kind of guy.
Chris, that's what this offseason has felt like, right? It's an offseason of ifs and
right.
whens and whats and depending on and whatever other words you want to throw out there. It's a waiting game. And especially with a team like the Cavs that is trying to weigh their options, especially with guys like Isaac Okoro and all those situations and how much money they're going to be dishing out, and then also conversations about who could be traded and how that could influence the aprons and the taxes and all the nerdy stuff that we've got into on multiple times during this podcast, right? I just think it's important that Cavs fans understand that this is a waiting game. There is no, like, end all be all right now. Like, it's just conversations that are happening about where they can get better around the margins, because like we've been saying since the offseason began, the Cavs want to keep the core four, and this is a situation where they want to compete for championships, but how do they do that while not hindering themselves for the future, right? Mm-hmm. So with all that being said, Chris, that'll wrap up today's episode of the One and Goal Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast. It's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.